I'm Red Pill Awakened, here to unveil the truth about the system that governs us. From birth, your name in all caps reduces you to a legal fiction, a corporate entity tied to commerce. This presumption ties you to a system of perpetual control. Understanding this allows you to reclaim autonomy, challenge assumptions, and operate privately. Let's break it down. In the legal world, a presumption is an assumption made by the government or courts about your status, behavior, or obligations unless you explicitly state otherwise. This is how most systems function by default. They assume you agree to their terms unless you actively rebut that assumption. From birth, the government presumes you to be an artificial person, also referred to as a legal fiction. Here's how it works. When you're born, your parents register your birth with the government, creating a legal entity tied to your name in all capital letters. This is not you, the living person. It's a corporate entity representing you in commerce. This artificial entity is the starting point for all interactions with the government, financial systems, and courts. The Social Security number further ties you to this legal fiction. It's essentially an identification number for the corporate entity, not the living, breathing you. This number is how you interact with federal agencies, pay taxes, and receive benefits. It's also what keeps you firmly under federal jurisdiction. Using the SSN in contracts or applying for credit signifies consent. Rebutting a presumption means challenging the government's default assumption that you are this artificial person and instead asserting your status as a private, natural person. This requires understanding the legal framework and redefining how you're identified. The name in all caps on your documents is not you, but the corporate entity created for commerce. You, the living person, have natural rights that exist outside this corporate construct. However, unless you rebut the presumption, you are treated as if you are the artificial person. To rebut this presumption, you must explicitly state that you are not the legal fiction and assert your status as a private American national or natural person. This involves filing affidavits, declarations of status, and other documents that clarify your standing. These documents often reference legal principles and codes, such as UCC 1 filings or trust declarations. Once you rebut the presumption, you must operate in a way that aligns with your new status, such as using private entities like LLCs, trusts, or CPNs. The system is designed to bind you to the legal fiction. Here's how it's structured. Most of what we think of as law in the United States is rooted in maritime or commercial law, not common law. Maritime law governs commerce and contracts, and the legal fiction created at your birth ties you to this system. Courts treat you as a corporate entity under these assumptions. By default, the government assumes you are a U.S. citizen, fully subject to its statutes and obligations, such as taxation and compliance. This jurisdiction is reinforced every time you use your SSN or sign a document with your legal fiction name. The system ensures most people remain in perpetual debt and never truly own anything, exposing assets to taxation and creditors. For example, when you buy a house, the deed often reflects the legal fiction as the owner, not you personally. This means your assets are fully exposed to lawsuits, liens, and taxation. When you correct your status, you remove yourself from these default assumptions and gain control over how you operate within the system, allowing you to protect assets and reduce liabilities. By rebutting the presumption, you can challenge the jurisdiction of statutory law over you. For example, courts must now consider whether they have authority over you as a private person rather than the artificial entity. When you operate through private entities like trusts or LLCs, you protect your assets and reduce liability, separating your identity from financial obligations. Once you understand the distinction between the legal fiction and the living person, you can transfer assets out of your name and into trusts or private entities. This protects them from taxation, creditors, and risks. As a private individual, you may no longer be subject to certain taxes or statutory requirements, depending on how you structure your affairs. Correcting your status isn't a casual process. It requires in-depth knowledge of the law. You must understand the principles behind the legal fiction and how to assert your rights effectively. Flawless documentation is essential. Any errors in declarations or filings can undermine your efforts. Your actions must align with your status, avoiding contradictions like using the SSN unnecessarily. Some may argue that the term status correction is irrelevant, but in reality, it's simply a phrase used to streamline the conversation. The term simplifies a profoundly complex process, but at its heart, it's about reclaiming control over your identity and operations and breaking free from default assumptions tied to the artificial person. By rebutting the presumption that you are an artificial person and shifting to operate as a private entity, you gain autonomy, protect your assets, and minimize your exposure to statutory obligations. This system has been in place since birth, designed to keep you in perpetual compliance. But status correction is about navigating this system to your advantage. Status correction ensures you are no longer a passive participant in a system designed to control and expose you, but instead an empowered individual operating on your terms. By understanding and asserting your rights, you transform your role within this framework, reclaiming autonomy and leveraging legal tools to secure financial and personal freedom. Understanding the system is the first step to reclaiming your freedom. By challenging assumptions, asserting your natural rights, and operating privately, you can break free from perpetual control. Status correction isn't just paperwork, it's a shift in how you engage with the world. I'm Red Pill Awakened, reminding you to take control of your identity, protect your assets, and redefine your path. The power is yours.